In this lecture, we're going to be going over the basics of drawing. So the first thing to understand about drawing is that everything is made out of shapes. Everything from characters to asset props can be broken down into very simple shapes such as squares, circles, and triangles. So let's go ahead and let's go over some examples of this. So right here, I have a character design that I've done. And what we're going to do is we're going to break her down into separate shapes. So just using my brush tool, I'm just going to go ahead and start painting out each shape. So her head is almost a triangle. It could even be thought of as a triangle and a circle. So we have a triangle there. I'm going to switch over to a darker color so you can see this better. So we have a triangle right there. And then we have a circle right here for her head. And then you might even turn that into an oval because of her hair. Then we got another circle back here. Her neck would be a rectangle. Her body would be a rectangle. And this arm would be a rectangle. And this hand would also be a rectangle. So you can see there that her whole form could be broken down into very simple shapes. Now obviously, once you've created your shapes for your object, you would start carving out and adding to it. So like this shoulder here would be added in. You would add in this diagonal line for her shoulders. But I want to get you into the habit of viewing things as shapes. So let's go ahead and look at another example. So here I have another character design I've done. Now I want you to look at this character for a while and try to figure out what kind of shapes he can be broken down into. Pause the video and do that. And once you're ready, go ahead and play it and I'll go along with you and break him down into his separate shapes. Alright, welcome back. Let's go ahead and break this character down. So first, let's start with the head. The head could be thought of as a triangle. And it even goes into a second triangle with his hair. So his hair is kind of a second triangle like so. And those would probably be broken down right in the middle there. His sword is sort of a trapezoid. His handle are two rectangles. And the bottom part of the handle is a rectangle. The fist is a square. Same with the other ones, basically a square. His arm is a rectangle, a long skinny one, and his other arm is broken down into two rectangles. Then his body is one big rectangle. His scarf is sort of a circle. Now I know that his head would be covering that part of the circle, but we're just going to draw on a basic circle there for now. His legs are broken down into two separate rectangles. And then his boots are sort of trapezoids. And we might even add a rectangle here because we're seeing that edge of the foot. So once again, you can see here that this character can completely be broken down into very basic shapes. So when you're creating assets or characters or any type of thing for your game, you always want to start out by drawing its shapes. Shapes are going to be the fundamentals and basics of what make your character or asset look really good. Let's have a look at one more example. So here on our tree and plant assets, we're going to go ahead and break a couple of these down into their shapes. So let me add a new layer so I'm not drawing on top of these. Let's start with this tree down here. So this tree can very easily be broken down into three circles. So one there, and one there. If you really wanted to go even further, you could just say that this is just one big circle, and then this down here is just a rectangle or square. This plant right here is just broken down into a simple circle. This one is broken down into either simple ellipticals or ellipses or one big triangle. I like to look at it as one big triangle. Same with this one. It's kind of a curvy triangle. This one can be broken down into another ellipse. Same with these little guys on the edges. This one's a little bit more complicated. For something complicated like this, you still want to simplify it by a lot. So I'm going to break each part of this tree down into big rectangles like so. Same with this part. then we're just going to add very simple shapes for the branches. And I would say that's about the basic shape of this tree. Now let's do two more. So let's do this mushroom here and this potted plant. So this mushroom is just a triangle with a line or a rectangle. And this potted plant is just a rectangle with sort of a triangle or a diamond shape sticking out of it. I'm going to go with a diamond. So let's go over the 4 basic shapes that make up artwork. So I have a new document here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to draw those 4 shapes. So the first one is a circle. Now this doesn't have to be perfect, but just go ahead and draw a circle like so. You might have to draw around a few times until you get that looking like a perfect circle. The next one is going to be a square. So we can go ahead and draw that square in. Now the square could also be a rectangle, but anything that has square corners is that type of shape. The next one is going to be a triangle. And the last one is going to be a trapezoid. After this lecture is over, I want you to go ahead and draw each one of these shapes 10 times, so you can really start making the drawing of these shapes instinct. Next, we're going to go over line. So there are a few different things we want to go over. The first one is how to create a straight line in Photoshop. So there's 2 different ways to do that. The first one is to click with your brush, then hold down Shift, then click somewhere else, and that will create a straight line from one point to the other. You can even do a diagonal one. And that's one way of creating a straight line. Now, what if you wanted to make a perfectly horizontal line or vertical line? Well, the way you can do that is by holding down Shift and then painting a line, and that will create a perfectly horizontal line. Now, if you want a vertical line, you'll do the same thing, but instead this time you're going to paint in the down direction. So holding down Shift, I'll go ahead and begin painting. Now you can see that creates a perfectly vertical line. Now we're also going to want to draw some curvy lines, so I'm going to have you practice these after this lecture also. So let's go ahead and try drawing some S curves, like so. Now these also don't have to be perfect, you just want to start getting into the habit of drawing lines and shapes. Now if these have to be a little bit sketchy, that's alright. Most of the time when we're drawing lines and shapes, it's going to be for our sketch process, but we're going to really clean things up later in Photoshop when we start actually building the assets. Next, let's go over form. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new layer, and I'm going to fill that layer in with white. So we have a new canvas. So what is form? Form is when you start adding 2-dimension to your 1-dimension shapes. So let's draw some 1-dimension shapes and see how they might convert into 2-dimension forms. So first, let's start with a rectangle. So I'm going to draw a rectangle. Now in 1 dimension, this might just look like a rectangle, but if you add form to it and you look at it from a different angle, it actually might be a cylinder. So let's go ahead and draw a cylinder. The way you draw a cylinder is by drawing an ellipse like so. Then you can draw the down lines, the vertical lines like so, and then you're going to draw another circle down here. Now unless this was transparent, you wouldn't see the second line back here, so we can go ahead and erase that. So this 1-dimension shape has now just become a 2-dimensional shape. Let's do another one. So if we draw a square, from the side it might just look like a square, but we can add some dimension to that by adding some perspective. So if we draw the face of our square like so, and we draw the other face, now we have some dimension. Now let's try doing a cone. So for a cone, what we're going to do is we're going to create our circle like so, or in this case it's an ellipse, and then we're going to draw a line up like so and a line up like so. Now this is a transparent cone, so we can go ahead and erase away this line right here to make it no longer transparent. Now lastly, let's go over the sphere. So the sphere is a ball. So it's basically going to be a circle in 2D. And it doesn't become 3D until we start adding some value and shadows and highlights to it, which is what we're going to go over next. So let's say we want to add some highlights and shadows to our sphere. I'm going to draw a new one over here that's a little bit cleaner. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a light source. Everything is made up of light and non-light. So if something's not being hit by light, it's going to be in shadow, and if something is being hit by light, it's going to have highlight. So over here, let's pretend like we have a lamp. Okay, and this lamp is going to be projecting light out of it, like so, within these two dotted lines. Now, it's probably going to be hitting this ball somewhere around here, and everything on the outside of that circle is going to be in shadow. So let's go ahead and draw on some lines to create our shadow, like so. So this is our highlight, and this is our shadow. Now let's say that this is on a surface. So let's add a shadow to it. Since the light is coming from over here, the shadow is going to be on this side of our ball, like so, and it's basically just going to be an ellipse, and we can go ahead and fill that in. So there's our shadow. Now, because this ball is on a surface, there's something called bounce light. And what bounce light is, for example, if you take a lamp and shine it on a white wall, it's going to bounce back and hit you in the face. If you have a lamp near you or a flashlight, go ahead and try this and you'll see what I'm talking about. So the way we can add that to our ball is simply by just darkening this middle area. So I'm going to add lines crisscrossing in the opposite direction like so. So now we have a really dark shadow here, and then we have a little bit lighter shadow down here. And that lighter shadow is lighter because it has a little bit of bounce light coming from the surface that it's sitting on and bouncing back up onto the bottom of our ball. Let's go ahead and try doing the shadow and highlight for a cube. So I'm going to draw a cube here. Now let's say that our light is coming from over here, so it's going to be coming from this direction. This surface right here is going to be getting hit by all the light, so we're going to leave it white. Then this top surface is going to be getting hit by some of the light, so we're going to add a little bit of shadow, but not too much. Then this surface right here is going to be being hit by very little light, so we're going to go ahead and make that really dark. And lastly, let's add in some shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my shadow like so. Then we can go ahead and fill that in. Perfect. Now, this shadow right here would be considered a cast shadow, but let's go over in more detail what a cast shadow is. So a cast shadow is any time that a light is being blocked, that's going to be a cast shadow. So for example, let's create a shape over here. It's going to be kind of shaped like a house or an arrow. So something like that. Now let's say that our light source is coming from right here. Now this surface right here and this surface right here are going to be getting hit directly with the light. So they're going to be very bright. Now this surface over here is not going to be getting hit by the light, so we're going to go ahead and add shadow to that. But there's one last place we have to add shadow on the surface of our shape, and that's right underneath this ledge. Because this ledge is here, it's going to be creating a cast shadow or a drop shadow. So we're going to create a line across like so. Let me make that a little bit straighter. And that's just going to be the shadow that's being cast from this top edge. So we can go ahead and fill that in. Cast shadows are very important in creating your artwork, and they're what make a lot of artwork look very realistic. Let's go over one more example of when there are cast shadows. So when you see a portrait of somebody, and let's say that their nose is right here, and then let's say that the sun is coming from up here and shining down on them. They're going to have a cast shadow that's being created from their nose. So their cast shadow might look something like so. That's another example of a cast shadow. Now, the last thing I want to go over in this lecture is perspective. So first, we're going to look at some examples of perspective, and then we're going to go ahead and start creating our own perspective drawings. So first, let's start with this one right here. This is an image that I created for an animated TV show, and it is making use of 1-point perspective. Now, what is 1-point perspective? Well, that's just a perspective that is built upon 1 point. I'll show you what I mean right now. So the first thing to understand about perspective is that you have to have a horizon line. And what a horizon line is imagine that you're standing out in a very flat desert and you're looking way off in the distance. That line between the sky and the earth, that's the horizon line. So in this image right here, it would be out here where this road meets the edge of our skyline. So let's go ahead and click out there. So let's go ahead and add a new layer on top of this, and then we're gonna draw on our horizon line. So I'm gonna click out on that edge, draw a straight line out that way. Same with the other side. So that's our horizon line right there. Now, a lot of the time you can't even see the horizon line in a photograph because it's covered by objects. In this case, we're actually able to see it because there's an open spot at the end of this street. Next, you need to have a point. In this case, it's 1-point perspective, so we only want 1 point, and it's going to go right here. Now, the reason why it's going to go right there is because all lines are leading to that point. If you look at this line right here, it's leading to that point. This line right here is leading to that point, and this one right here is leading to that point. And that's why it's 1-point perspective. Now, basically everything in this image can be drawn from that 1 point. Now, all the buildings in this image are a little bit wonky, so they might not line up perfectly, but they line up pretty well. So if I click here to here, you'll see all these buildings, the top edges sort of follow that line. Same with the other side. Now, they're all different heights, and so you would want to draw different lines for each one. But you'll basically see how they line up with this 1 point. Now let's have a look at what's called 2-point perspective. It's basically exactly like 1-point perspective, but you have 2 points. So in this image, it can be very complicated to understand all the perspective in it, but we're going to have a look at just the single perspective on one of these buildings. So this building right here has 2-point perspective. So if we find our horizon line, which is probably somewhere about out here, and draw that across there, and then we draw a line from here to there, and from there to, let's come a little bit further over. But you can see that there's 2 points here. And same with this bottom area. So if we go from there to there, and there to there, you can't really see this bottom edge because it's covered by a bush, but basically that line would be right there, and that one would be right there. Then this would be our line right there, and this one would be right there. Same with the one on the other side. And so that's basically the cube that we're creating. So things to understand with 2-point perspective is that you have to have 2 points on your horizon line, and then they have to come together and meet in the middle to create a shape. Now let's go ahead and try creating our own perspective drawings. So I have a new document here, and what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a horizon line. So I'm going to create one right here. Then I'm going to first start off with my 1-point perspective. So I'm going to draw my point right there. And then what we can do is we can draw a shape. So let's start off with a square. So I'm just going to draw a basic square here. And so in this case, it would be the front part of this building right here, or the side of this building right here. That's our square that we just drew right now. Then we're going to go ahead and create a line from that point to that point, and that point to that point. Then we're just going to create a straight line right here to create this face of our shape. And then we can go ahead and erase away these lines because they should be invisible. So now we just created a cube in 1-point perspective. Let's try doing the same thing but for a circle. So I'm going to get my brush tool, and I'm just going to draw a circle like so. And now we can just draw from one point to the other. Same with this side. And with a circle, we're going to add another rounded edge out here to create our cylinder. And so now we have a basic cylinder in 1-point perspective. Now, when we're actually creating assets and stuff like that, we would want to take more time to make sure this is completely accurate. But just for demonstration purposes, we're just going to quickly create these. Let's do one more, which is going to be a triangle. So there's our triangle. And basically any corner you want to create a perspective line coming off of. So this corner right here is going to come to a point, same with this one, same with that one. And then we'll just create basically the same shape on the further edge. Then we can go ahead and erase this away, like so. And now we have a triangle in 1-point perspective. Now let's move on to creating 2-point perspective. So let's create a new horizon line down here. And then we're going to create our 2 points. So I'm going to put them all the way out on our outer edges. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw a line from here to here. And then I can draw a line straight up like so. And that's going to be my middle line. So if we come back into our 2-point perspective example, the line we just drew is this line right here. So let's come back in here. Now we want to draw all these points from one point to another, like so. And this is going to be your basic setup for creating 2-point perspective, is one line here in the center wherever you want it, and then you need to connect all of these points together. Then we're going to go ahead and draw a vertical line on this side, and we'll do the same for the other. And now we can go ahead and erase away these lines because they should be invisible. And now we just created a cube in 2-point perspective. Now what if you wanted to do something like a cylinder? Well, the way you do that is first by creating a rectangular shape in 2-point perspective. Now I know that sounds counterintuitive, but trust me, this is the way you want to do it. So once we've created this shape right here, we want to convert it into a cylinder. So what you need to do is you need to fill this surface in with a circle. Now because it's in perspective, you're going to need to follow each one of these corners and make sure they touch in the middle. That way, you create your circle in 2-point perspective. Now, this isn't perfect, and there's better ways to do this, and I'll show you how later in the course, but for now, we're just going to hand draw our circle in. Next, what you want to do is you want to create a line from this edge to this point, and then from this point to that edge. Then we can go ahead and erase away all these extra lines, because we do not need them anymore. And then we want to draw a curve over on this side like so to create the back edge of our cylinder. And then we can go ahead and erase away these lines. And now we have a basic cylinder in 2-point perspective. That brings us to the end of this lecture. So in this lecture, you learned how all drawings and pieces of artwork can be broken down into basic shapes. Next, you learned about how to create form, and then you learned how to create highlights and shadows for your forms. Lastly, we looked at some examples of 1-point perspective and 2-point perspective, and then we went ahead and created some of our own 1-point and 2-point perspectives. Your assignment for this lecture is to complete the worksheet in the next lecture. If you really want to be a great artist, you need to practice the fundamentals, and the #1 fundamental of art is drawing. So go ahead and complete that worksheet, and I'll see you in the next video lecture. Thanks for watching.